everyone that's taken the time to participate tonight. We appreciate all of you taking your afternoon or your evening to be able to be here. And again, I'd just like to say thank you. And the next thing we need is we're going to have the prayer and the pledge is going to be handled by Mr. Rick Cochran. Rick?
Pray with me, please. Father, we come to you tonight to meet with the County of Washington to discuss painful episode. Father, you are so faithful to us, and you speak through our scripture to us, and in them you tell us that if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. Father, you're always faithful to us, and we ask for the healing needed here in our county. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Rick. We have the agenda in front of you. This is only a one-item agenda. Do I have a motion to accept the agenda as is? Do I have a second? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. I'm sorry, I skipped the roll call. Carly, would you call the roll, Pete, please?
Daniel Balls.
Here.
Harvey Bowman.
Here.
Rick Cochran.
Here.
Robert Dennis.
Here.
Lisa Ecke.
Here.
John Furman.
Here.
Ann Harbison.
Here.
Sharon Lloyd. Tom Lundstrom.
Here.
Eva Madison.
Here.
Sue Madison.
Here.
Joel Maxwell.
Here.
Joe Patterson.
Here.
Butch Pond.
Here.
Bill Ussery.
Here.
4 present. Do you folks have a report to hand out to everyone present?
Judge, we were not able to print it because of the size, but Karen has a copy on PDF that she is going to make available to everyone if she hasn't already. I've given her a copy that can be posted on the county's website and one that can be emailed out. I encountered some difficulties because all the pictures included, the size of it is very large and was almost beyond my technical capacity.
Well, how does everyone feel about not having a report in front of you? Speak up, folks.
It's a PowerPoint presentation that we'll be showing as we go. It's designed to be sort of more of a visual presentation than a written report.
I would like to see us just move forward to the presentation, if we could, please, Judge.
Is that in a form of a motion?
Yes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Carly, would you call the roll, please?
John Furman.
Yes.
Ann Harbison.
No.
Sharon Lloyd.
Yes.
Tom Lundstrom.
Yes.
Eva Madison.
Yes.
Sue Madison.
Yes.
Joel Maxwell.
Yes.
Joe Patterson.
Yes.
Butch Pond.
Yes.
Bill Ussery.
Yes.
Daniel Balls.
Yes.
Harvey Bowman.
Yes.
Rick Cochran.
Yes.
Robert Dennis.
Yes.
Then we will move forward.
Miss Lisa.
So then we will start with the report of the investigation with Mr. Russell Hill and Eva Madison and Mr. Carl Gale. Thank you folks very much. So we'll proceed from there.
Thank you very much,
Well,
Judge.
let me ask one question. Russell, did you not have something that you wanted to speak and ask the court to do?
Oh, thank you. I was going to just ask that if you look in the bottom right-hand or left-hand corner, there's a little number. There's a small number there, which we have each slide numbered. We'd like to be able to go through all of the slides and just present everything before. And so, what I would recommend, if we could, to write down the slide number and then any question you might have, and then once we've gone through everything, then any questions. That I'm just trying to save time and it be in a timely manner, and then that way we can pop back to any slide that we need to and answer any question we need to. But I'm hoping that as we go through this, we'll answer some of those questions, and then we won't spend 10 minutes on each slide. So,
I think that's a good idea if everyone's, okay, thank you, Russ. Okay, proceed, please.
This first slide just talks about an overview of our investigation. We began our investigation on Wednesday, April 22nd. We concluded our interviews yesterday, Monday, May 4th. Over 7 days, we interviewed 16 current and former county employees. We attempted to interview an additional 6 current and former employees who refused or could not be reached. We met with a structural engineer who prepared the plans for both the Harvey Dowell and the Stonewall bridges. We reviewed construction photos, work logs, engineering plans, and gathered additional documents along the way. We also visited the bridges. We specifically toured the Harvey Dowell Bridge with Carl Gales with us, consulting the plans as we went. Many of those photos are incorporated into the presentation so that you all will be able to understand exactly what we were seeing when we were out there. Specifically, we talked to members of the bridge and tile crews because they were the crews that did a significant portion of the work on the bridges. With respect to the bridge crew, we were able to meet with the former supervisor who's now retired, the former lead man who resigned during the investigation, and 1 crew member. 4 crew members of the bridge crew were unwilling to be interviewed, and 2 of them resigned during the investigation. The tile crew, we were able to interview the current supervisor who was the former lead, the current lead, and 2 crew members. We were unable to interview the former supervisor, who's actually a current supervisor with the county in another role, because he was out on a leave of absence. So it wasn't because he refused, he was just unavailable to us. So I'm going to go through just a brief overview of the bridges at first. The Harvey Dowell Bridge, for those of you who may not know where it is located east of Fayetteville, north of Huntsville Road. This is the old Harvey Dowell Bridge. It was built in 1926. It last had a weight limit of 7 tons and had been deemed structurally deficient. This is the current Harvey Dowell Bridge. We took these photos on our visit with Mr. Gales. And this is an overview from Google of the bridge itself, and this is actually the new bridge. So just a description, it goes out over the West Fork of the White River. It's located in J.P. Ponds District. Demolition of the old bridge began in January 2013 after some months of permitting and getting plans and things like that together. The new bridge opened in December 2013. The weight limit was reduced to 3 tons in March of this year as a result of the issues that have been raised. This is the Stonewall Bridge. It is near Prairie Grove. This is the old Stonewall Bridge, not quite as old as the Harvey Dowell Bridge. We couldn't actually pinpoint a year for the Stonewall, but it had better weight limits when it was last in use. It was 9 ton, 10 ton, to 11 ton, depending on the code. This is the Google Earth image of the old bridge. This is Stonewall Bridge as it currently stands. The construction is in process. It goes over the Muddy Fork Creek. It's a tributary of the Illinois River. West of Prairie Grove, it is located in J.P. Maxwell's district. Demolition of the old bridge began in September 2014, and the bridge remains incomplete, obviously, as indicated by the picture. This is the basics of the 2 bridges that we're talking about. The construction for the Harvey Dowell and the Stonewall bridges is very similar. You have 2 abutments, walls at the ends. They have wings on the sides. And then there's 2 center supporting piers, and then there are beam spans in between. So this is an overview of the engineering drawing that shows you those 4 sort of supporting structures along the bridge. This is actually the Harvey Dowell, but like I said, the Stonewall is very, very similar in construction. This is an actual picture of the Harvey Dowell Bridge, so you can actually see one of the abutments, one of the piers, and then you see those beam spans stretching between those structures. Just to give you a little bit idea, we've had a bridge crew for a long, long time. I would say, though, that in recent years, before the Harvey Dowell Bridge in 2013, the bridge crew's work was primarily in performing bridge maintenance or in installing what they call sometimes prefab bridges or what the highway department calls box culverts. In fact, the highway department doesn't even consider those to be bridges. So for several years, you had the bridge crew performing work on bridges, but not actually constructing bridges until the 2013 Harvey Dow Bridge. We came across the County Road 62 bridge in our investigation. This is the last comparable bridge that was built by the county. It has the supporting piers, actually just one, and the abutment walls. It was built in 2007 under former County Judge Jerry Hutton. It is believed to be the only other county bridge that was constructed with the use of engineering plans. It is located off Highway 62 on County Road 62, also known as Bethel Blacktop Road, west of Farmington over the Illinois River. It is located in J.P. Cochran's district. This is actually a picture, and you can kind of see where the old road used to go and the new road kind of curves in when they reconstructed the bridge. This is the current bridge. And so they're very, you can look at them and tell that they're very similar in terms of the construction type. Yes, I did go crawling around under bridges. The 62 bridge was built with similar construction techniques. We were able to talk to people who actually worked on that bridge. There are some of the same crew here or that worked on Harvey Dow and Stonewall bridges that worked on the 62 bridge. So because of that, there are similarities in the construction. And there was actually a plaque at that bridge that you can see who all worked on the crew or what crews worked on the bridge. During our investigation, we learned of deficiencies, which not really a bridge, it's a box culvert, north of Highway 412, west of Elm Springs on Osage Creek Road. Two witnesses told us that it should be condemned immediately because concrete and water erosion had caused part of the road to cave in. We heard this from a couple of witnesses, like I said. One even had photos on his phone that was showing sort of collapsing in the road because of the erosion coming out underneath. The folks that told us about this said they had been complaining about it for quite some time without success. There had been some temporary fixes, but the water was just too much, and it was just any fix would just quickly get washed away. So not wanting to wait to tell you all about this until today, we promptly notified the county judge's office the day we learned of the problem, and the bridge was replaced the following day on Thursday, April 30th, and these are actually pictures of the repaired work. So they reinstalled, as I understand it, 5, I may be wrong, but I think it was 5 of the culverts that the bridge crew actually builds in the bridge shop, and so that work was done as a result of the investigation. This is a little bit of the work. You can see, not totally sure it's finished, but we caught it obviously right after it had been done. So turning now to the questions that we were asked, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the questions. This is the question that is the bulk of our report, and so this question is going to take some time. We were asked whether the road department built the Stonewall Bridge and the Harvey Dow Bridge to engineering specifications, and the answer we learned to that, which I think all of you probably already knew, was no, and we'll get into that. Was the engineer consulted on these deviations? We talked to Jim Beatty. He was not consulted on the deviations, and the deviations from the plans were not documented in any way. So I'm going to kind of start at the bottom and work your way up as we build the bridge to tell you about the concerns. The first is the footings. The plans state the footings shall be founded a minimum of 1 foot into the material designated as chert on one bridge, limestone on the other, which requires excavation down to the rock and then 1 foot down to achieve a solid base. So you're actually reaching the rock and then going another foot in to try to create a stable footing for these structures that you're installing. In most instances, crews did not reach this depth, but they would drill into the rock instead and set in a number 11 rebar, and the rebar was not epoxied or otherwise anchored into place. The plans go on to state that prior to pouring concrete, the allowable bearing pressure shall be verified by a geotechnical engineer. So that means once the crews have excavated down to that level, you need to have a geotech engineer come in and actually pressure test to make sure that, in fact, it is a stable base, because there could be an air pocket or something underneath it. No such testing was performed, we believe, until March of 2015. So none of that was done on Harvey Dow. We are doing a little better with the help of our geotechnical engineers on Stonewall now. The crews fought a considerable amount of water, as you might imagine. They're around a body of water, and mud while digging for the footings at both the walls and the piers. In one instance at Stonewall Bridge, they actually encountered a spring. So they were fighting to keep the water pumped out, the mud pumped out. The road department does have pumps. I just think it proved to be a challenging task. You can see in this instance, this is the Stonewall East abutment, which is the most recent of the completions at Stonewall, and it was very well constructed in terms of the overall construction, and you can see that they're fighting water. On the west side, which we don't have pictures of, we received reports of much more significant water and mud that the crews were dealing with. People reported to us then that concrete was poured into that water and mud, which some water and mud is you can't get rid of all of it. But it was reported that it was enough of a depth that people were concerned about the concrete being mixed in with water and mud and perhaps not providing a stable foundation. In some instances, when surfaces were not level, rocks were used to prop up steel mats. You can actually see that in this picture. That is actually contrary to the Highway Department standards, although Carl says that that is one of the things that they have difficulty getting crews to do, so that's not common to the road department necessarily. And while I've brought it up, the specs in the engineering plans incorporate the Highway Department's very, very extensive specifications for building roads and building structures. So having a set of the plans by themselves is not significant. You've actually got to go to this book that's pretty thick. Those specs are also available online. I have done some reviewing of those myself. And so in some instances, you can't get all the answers from the plans. You actually have to go to the Highway Department standards to get more information, and that's where this issue with rocks came up. So moving on, one of the issues that we've heard about is the bending of steel. The plans in many instances call for bent steel or rebar. And this is an example. This is one of the piers, and you can see, it's a little hard, maybe a little hard for you all to see, but there are bent L bars at the base. There are also hook bars, and that's to create a stable footing. And then when you get up into the cap, that cantilevered section of the pier, you're going to have wraparounds. So once you've made your sort of grid of rebar, then you're going to wrap it. So those wraps will have bends at all those turns. This is just some examples of the applications of the bends. There are many more where steel is tied together with curving rebar. Per Highway Department standards, bars are to be bent cold unless otherwise permitted by the engineer, and no bars partially embedded in concrete are to be bent in the field, except as shown on plans or as permitted by the engineer. One of the reasons why you're using cold bent is because heat reduces the strength of the steel. The plans actually give the specs for how to bend all of the steel. And I think this is somewhat helpful. In many instances, when a construction job is being performed with steel specs, the contractor, whoever it is, will send out those plans to a metal fabricator, whatever steel provider they're using. And the steel provider will actually assemble all of the steel as called for in the plans, exactly as called for. They cut it to the length, they give you the right size, they bend it the way it needs to be bent, and then they wrap it up in bundles and label it, almost like an erector set, right? You get all your pieces, and then they deliver it to the job site as you're actually working on the progress of the bridge. We don't do that in the county. We buy our steel sort of in bulk, in standard lengths, and do all of that ourselves. So that's one of the reasons that we're trying to bend steel on our own. In some applications, including particularly in the footers, the bent rebar was replaced with straight rebar. In other applications, it was bent with a torch or heat, mostly on site. Some of that was done at the actual shop. They had a somewhat inadequate bender originally that they were trying to use, and they were having trouble with bending some of the really thick rebar, and it was breaking. I think maybe the machine just wasn't quite up for it. They did eventually acquire a proper bender in December of 2014. The next issue is the lap. How much overlap should there be in tying together the steel? This is the base of the footer plan, and you can see you've got those pieces that come up, the curved pieces, the bent pieces that come up out of the footer. That line across sort of about halfway up is the actual footer base itself, where ground level would be. And you see where you've got that double thickness, so that you've got that one upshoot coming out, and then you're going to tack on another piece of rebar. The plans call for a minimum lap of 5 feet 10 inches, so we're talking a pretty significant height coming out of the ground to overlap. The crews understood that 2 to 3 feet was always sufficient for lap length. So in many of the instances where the plans called for lap, there was inadequate lap done. So this kind of shows you sort of what was done compared to what was called for in the specifications. The plans also called for for example, the piers, continuous steel bars. So you're going to have one continuous piece of steel going up from the footer base all the way to the top. The crews in many instances did not use continuous steel because they had difficulty actually physically keeping it up there. One of the crew members reported that in a prior experience he'd had an issue where a piece of rebar fell and knocked somebody on the head, maybe him, I can't remember. And so there was concern about the safety even of using that upright rebar at that height. And so instead they would lap bars together instead of using the continuous piece of steel. In some instances, the crews did not place the steel before the concrete was poured. The steel was added to wet concrete after the fact and thus not tied in. In some instances, the crews did not add the steel until after the concrete had already set, and so they were left to drill holes, which is, of course, what we've seen in the video. And that was a common practice because the crews understood that to be acceptable. Crews were generally unfamiliar with the use of epoxy to epoxy bars into holes like that. They did not use epoxy until sometime in the late fall of 2014 after questions started surfacing. Jim Beatty did remember some use of epoxy perhaps maybe on the 62 bridge when he was consulted about a fix. And he was consulted pretty regularly on the 62 bridge. I think it was the first time that folks were using plans, and so he was called more times, or I guess called on the 62 bridge. So the crews did use epoxy on that east abutment wall, which is the Prairie Grove side of the Stonewall Bridge, which is that bridge I showed you that was the most recent of the constructions. There were other concrete issues that we discovered. Crews reported that they were pouring concrete off the chutes from the concrete truck at heights ranging from 3 to 4 feet to 5 to 6 feet to up to 20 feet. So you've got that concrete falling a considerable height. Sometimes it's falling over steel, which kind of messes up the composition a little bit. And falling this far causes segregation, and Carl gave a very good example. If you bake a cake with chocolate chips in it and you do that to it, you're going to have all your chocolate chips at the bottom. You got to go back in and stir it up to evenly mix your mix. A concrete pump was used infrequently. A concrete pump, or there's, what's the name of the elephant trunk? Trimmy. There's a concrete pump, pumper truck can be used, or a trimmy is a tool that's like an elephant's trunk that you can attach on, and that enables the crew to actually get down to the base away from the rebar and spray the concrete in at a lower height so it's not falling. But concrete pumps were used, or pumper trucks were used infrequently. We received reports of them being used on the road deck at Harvey Dow, and then as a result of advice from the geotechnical engineer, they have been used in some recent applications at the Stonewall Bridge. So what does that do? It creates an effect called honeycombing due to the lack of vibration. John probably knows what this is. He has a knowing look on his face. From the American Concrete Institute, the ACI, which is a source for information, obviously on concrete, they define honeycombing as the voids left in concrete between coarse aggregates due to inadequate consolidation. Having honeycombing will accelerate deterioration of the concrete due to the freeze thaw, because moisture and grit and things work its way into the concrete, and then when it heats and cools and expands and contracts, you have that mixed in with your support structures. So this is an example of honeycombing on the Harvey Dow decking. You see in the lower picture a very smooth edge, and in the upper picture, a kind of a rough edge where you see the honeycombing. This is an example of some very smooth concrete. It's very pretty. The picture on the left is the new East Pier at the Stonewall Bridge that they have been building under the supervision of the geotechnical engineer, and it's a very pretty, smooth, nice concrete. I'm going to use some pictures, I think, to help illustrate things from a bridge that the state is constructing out Highway 16. It's a very big bridge. They are using a contractor, but it's very good to see it in process. So you see this pier from that bridge, and you see how really beautiful the concrete is. I don't know that I ever thought I would describe concrete as beautiful, but you see it as very, very smooth. And that's the goal you're going for when you're talking about these concrete applications. So we saw a considerable amount of honeycombing. This is honeycombing at the base of one of the Harvey Dow piers. There's more of it. This is actually in the east wall at the Stonewall Bridge, was the most recent construction. And these are just some sample pictures. There's actually a considerable amount of honeycombing present in the work that's performed. This is actually in the 62 abutment. So we're going back to 2007 now, where you see honeycombing. And Carl has informed me you can kind of see a line in this where the honeycombing is, and that's...
Mouse, I think.
Oh, yeah. I don't know that I can. No. I think it's not my computer, though, so I don't know.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, you can kind of, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but you can kind of see it, this joint. And what that is that it's between two different pours of a different concrete truck. So this lower section, they finished it, and they were waiting on another concrete truck. And there are applications you can use to kind of keep the concrete wet so that when you bring in the next round of concrete, it mixes better. But this is a cold joint where that wasn't done. So you have the lower section drying before you bring in the next truck. And that's to be expected. I mean, you can't control the time concrete trucks are there, but it creates sort of a seam, and then you see that sort of creates potentially a weak structure in the abutment. This was one of the worst pictures we saw in terms of the pier at Harvey Dow, just in terms of the concrete construction. I'm not sure what happened, if a form slipped or what, but that's the kind of thing you see at the Harvey Dow Bridge. So generally, the crews used plywood forms. You see those on the picture in the right that were currently up at the Stonewall Bridge. And then you can actually see, this is the south abutment wall at Harvey Dow. If you look closely, you can actually see the wood grain from the plywood sheets, which is an acceptable way, certainly acceptable way to use wood forms. But that gives you an idea of the techniques. Because of the use of plywood, they really couldn't form everything all the way up like some entities do, where you have metal forms that you can kind of go up higher. They're able to only kind of work with the size of the plywood. So what that does is it creates this, there's many different pours. You pour one batch, it dries, and then they're moving up their forms as they go. But what that creates is it creates that cold joint issue of the dry concrete adhering to a new batch of wet concrete. Carl says that's common to do that, but you have to prepare the concrete. You have to clean it very carefully, get all debris off of it, and score it to actually make sure that you're creating a surface that you're able to adhere to, so that the new wet concrete comes in and is sure to stick, so you don't have any adhesion issues. Some plans will actually call for an adhesive material. These plans did not. We could not find any instances where concrete was truly prepared between those pores for adherence. This is just a picture to give you an idea of how high the water levels are that we're dealing with on these bridges. This is the 62 bridge, and you've got really considerably sized logs up in the steel at the 62 bridge. So that just shows you how much water you're having to deal with and how much the structure is having to withstand. This is one of the abutments. This is the footing for the abutment, and you can actually see sort of where it's beginning to possibly erode underneath the footing a little bit. This is a seam in the north abutment wall at Harvey Dowell. The orange indicates that there's rust, so that means probably water is getting through the seam and the iron is rusting, and so it's coming out. So you perhaps have a leak, for lack of a better word, in the wall. We saw several cracks that were visible in the concrete at Harvey Dowell. You've got a crack in the south abutment wall, a crack in one of the caps of the piers. There's another crack in a pier sort of in a different direction. And then we saw some cracking in the northeast abutment, all at Harvey Dowell. We saw a very similar crack in an abutment at 62, almost in an identical fashion, suggesting that maybe the steel is not reinforced there properly. One of the deviations from the plan is that the plans call for exposed corners to be chamfered, and that's to prevent chipping. And so you see in that left picture, that is the new pier at the stone wall, where you see that really pretty edge that's chamfered, sort of smoothed out to prevent chipping. We didn't see very much chamfering on the work at the completed Harvey Dowell Bridge. So this is the south abutment wall, and you can see that kind of sharp edge, which just makes it susceptible to chipping and more wear. Going through the work logs, you could see that concrete was poured some days in cold temperatures. They started constructing the Harvey Dowell Bridge in February of 2013, so there were certainly some cold days. And then it continued into late 2013 with some more cold days. And then they also had some cold days at the Stonewall Bridge late last year. It's not necessarily improper to pour concrete in these cold temperatures, but AHTD specifications call for very careful techniques when you're pouring concrete in that kind of weather. We couldn't really tell that was followed. I mean, you really have to put blankets over concrete, and it requires a lot of extra attention and care to make sure that the concrete cures. It's also going to depend on whether you're pouring concrete in a footer or up in the air. So you see it being done both in the roadway, up in the air, and in footers. We noted some material quality issues. There were no concrete test cylinders performed on any of the concrete until late in the process at Stonewall. That's actually where the geotechnical engineer comes out, takes out of the concrete truck the concrete that you're about to pour. They do a test cylinder. That's really to test the quality and strength of your design mix to make sure that you're in fact getting the concrete you've paid for. We don't really have issues with concrete folks around here providing bad concrete, but it's something that should be done to make sure that you're getting the design mix that you're paying for and that the strength of the concrete is appropriate for the application. So that was a concern. There were no material certifications in terms of the materials done, and one of the notable issues is that the county is buying, in many instances, used steel beams from the state. When the state is out there tearing out bridges, they have steel beams that still have life left in them, so they'll buy those. But Carl said that in those instances, you should have them tested and certified. We noted these beams that were just sort of left out at the Stonewall Bridge, along with a considerable amount of rebar. One of the reasons that we asked why crews didn't do that sort of contractor way of sending the plans out and having the rebar custom done and shipped in, and there was a concern about leaving rebar at the sites because it had been stolen. And then it seemed odd to me that we've got these beams that are just sitting out there with a lot of rebar, and it's obviously wearing on the iron as it sits there. And this is just from the Highway Department standards with respect to steel. When you're using steel, you've got to make sure it's clean, that it's free from dirt, rust, scale, paint, oil, because you want it to adhere, the concrete to adhere. They are very specific on how it should be stored. We heard instances of steel that was being used out at the job sites being rolled over by equipment. There's an instance where a tree fell in some of the steel that was in concrete already. So it doesn't sound like there's a lot of the appropriate level of care given to the steel, given the importance of adherence. This is just some of the steel that was left out at the Stonewall site. So this is the south abutment at Harvey Dow, the plans. It's a little hard to see because you've got all the dimensions on the outside, but those arrows sort of signify the general shape of the wall. You've got the main abutment with the two wings, and I would just want you to note the angles on those wing walls. They're very similar, both south and north, in terms of the angles. So this is the north wall from Google. You can see that the angles look pretty close to the plans. And this is the south abutment. It's visible if you're out there that it doesn't follow the plans. We're not sure why that deviation occurred. The water does flow the way that it could possibly be interfering with that sharp turn on the southwest corner.
Yeah, the water flow is upstream, so it would flow into the side of that. So instead of having an angle during large amounts of rain and water, you've got a flat surface as opposed to as an angle, so the water's going to hit up against it. So.
And this is just a picture of the actual wall itself from the ground. So you can see that really sharp, almost 90-degree turn on the southwest side, and then a much more gentle, more like a 30-degree slope on the other side. The next issue is with the Harvey Dow beams. The spacing of the beams has been challenging for the crews. These are the plans that show on the left-hand side, you've got the two beams joining at the pier, and there's a gap. And then on the right-hand side, you've got where the beam is sitting then on the abutment and the gap between the beam and the wall. You've got to allow that space so that the bridge can breathe, it expands and contracts, and hot and cold. So these are the actual joints where you see it sitting on top of the pier, really like right up against, the steel is right touching itself. And then at the south abutment wall, it's touching the concrete. And then this is the north abutment wall where you can kind of see on that last beam, you see a little sliver of light so that you can see that there's really not a lot of room between the beam and the wall. AHTD, when it inspected the Harvey Dow Bridge before it opened in December 2013, did note this issue with the steel. It was repaired. It seems to either have gone back to the way it was, or maybe it was not repaired completely appropriately, but this has been an issue with the bridge. Part of that stems from the fact that they're using the steel that they're purchasing it's not been fabricated specifically for the plans. It's steel that they have acquired from the state. This beam didn't quite fit, and so you can actually see where a torch was used to modify it so that it would fit on top of the pier. All of the beams are then bolted into the concrete structures on which they're placed, either the abutment or the pier. When talking to Jim Beatty about how he envisioned it, because this was one of the things that I had a little difficulty deciphering from the plans, the idea is that when you pour the concrete, when you pour the wall or the pier, you leave a sleeve in your concrete so that you then come back, set your beam in, and then bolt in with a bolt to that actual sleeve. So that's how the plans call for the beam to be attached to the piers and abutments. Sleeves were not used. They did not prepare for the bolts until after the fact. And the crews attempted to drill holes in the piers and abutments to affix the bolts. And sometimes, as you might imagine, they encountered steel when they were doing that drilling, making the drilling difficult or at some points impossible. We received a little bit of a conflicting report on this. Some people told us that they thought 2 or 3 bolts were actually left out. Others told us that they got them in there just as far as they would go. They weren't all the way in, but they weren't left out. And Carl actually also noted some loose bolts that were visible underneath the Harvey Dow structure. Painting seems a little cosmetic, but obviously you paint your steel to prevent water and rust erosion. The crews typically paint the steel at the shop on the bad weather days and then take it out to the site. The painting really wasn't quite finished at Harvey Dow. You could see up under the bridge where the painting just wasn't finished all the way. And then the same thing is visible at the 62 bridge where you just didn't have the painting completed. So now we're kind of moving on to the decking. The plans state that the bridge deck is to be given a tine finish. And the tine finish, which I'll show you a picture in the next slide, it's like you rake it, so it creates grooves, but it increases safety by allowing for water to get out of the way and for better traction, which is important on a bridge. And then once that tine surface is applied, you're actually to apply boiled linseed oil to improve the surface. This is actually the tine finish at the States Highway 16 bridge. So you can actually see they take a metal rake to get those grooves in the concrete surface. There's no tine finish on the roadway surfaces. We didn't have the plans for 62, so I didn't really compare that, but the 62 surface is also smooth. But this is the surface at Harvey Dow. Very smooth concrete would create risks of slipping and things like that if you're on the road surface. So the next issue is with the curb and the guardrail. The plans call for a curbed concrete wall at the road deck's edge. There was no curb installed on the Harvey Dow Bridge, so there's actually nothing at the road's edge to catch a tire and prevent you from going off. The crews used a guardrail instead. This is a plan deviation like with the south abutment wall that is visible. If you can consult the plans, you'll be able to look at the bridge and know that this is a plan deviation. The crews did not think they had the ability to do these kind of curbs. They felt like they needed expensive forms that they didn't have to be able to do that. But Carl said there was a point in time where you didn't have forms, you had to make them out of wood, and so carpenters would be able to construct those and make forms if necessary. So this is actually what the application was that's used. What you've got is you've got these vertical beams that they actually welded on to the supporting beams, poured the concrete around those, and then used galvanized guardrails to add. So there's the lack of a lip is a concern. Let me show you this next picture. Well, the County Road 62 is done exactly the same way. This is the States Bridge out Highway 16, and this is actually the per plan application. So you see on the left hand that pretty concrete edge. And the goal there is that when the tire hits that rail, that curb, the vehicle is going to be diverted back onto the roadway. So you don't go off, you stay on. with the use of the guardrail and the lack of the curb, you're going off the bridge. And because the vertical supports for the guardrail are tied into the bridge's support beams, you're taking part of the bridge with you when you go. But you can see on this left-hand picture the way that they're tying the rebar for the curb into the roadway rebar. And in case you're wondering, this green rebar is epoxy coated, and we asked about that, and Jim Beatty did not include the use of epoxy coated rebar in either of the bridge plans. That's a common application in roadways, but he decided for the type of use that these bridges had, it wasn't necessary. And then he also wasn't aware of extensive chemical application in bad weather by our road department, which would warrant a stronger surface. It just makes the road surface last longer. So don't be misled by the fact that there's green rebar. It's a best practice, but it wasn't called for by these plans. So one consequence of leaving off the curb is that the road's not quite wide enough. You'll see in this plan that the road actually extends out a couple feet, 2.5 feet, for that curb. And when they left off the curb, they actually omitted that road width. So the road is 4 to 5 feet narrower than it should be according to the engineering plans. And that just sort of makes for a not as wide a road, is not quite as safe. So you see sort of the part that was left off. This also is visible because you start asking when you're out there at the bridge about the gaps. This is I believe this is the north abutment wall. You see that there's sort of extra room. There's more room in the abutment where the arrow is, where it looks like the road should be extended. And then the same is visible with the piers. The piers sort of stick out past the roadway because the pier is the right size, but the road is not, because the road was envisioned to hang out more over that pier. The same is true at the 62 bridge. Even though we did not have the plans, it certainly looks like the same application was done there. We received reports about the decking rebar spacing not being to plan. You see those little black things that are kind of standing up? Those are called rebar chairs. They're to instead of rocks, you use those to raise the rebar up and keep it at the right level. They said that there was a shortage of those, and so they ended up using 12-inch centers on the rebar in some places rather than the 9-inch. So you've just got wider spacing of the rebar in your road deck at Harvey Dow than the plans called for. This is not really a construction defect. It's something that came up. Several people reported to us that when the west wall was poured at Stonewall that there was no footer used, or not footer, excuse me, there were no forms used for the footer. And that sounded like it was improper, but not necessarily, because in building construction all the time, they use the earth as your form, right? You dig a ditch, you don't use forms, you just use the earthen walls as your forms. So it was not necessarily improper, not quite as pretty, if that matters, in a footer, but it required a considerable amount more of concrete. It was estimated that it took an additional 60 yards of concrete because you're filling up all that space rather than just trying to fill up your wood form. So that concludes the part about the deviations from the plans that we're able to uncover. The rest of question 1 goes on to ask why were the deviations made. And let me say, in the defense of the bridge crew and the workers that performed this work, they really did not know better. There was a lack of knowledge and training on how to read engineering plans and on the significance of following those engineering plans. These folks took great pride in the work they did, even though you look at it and think, because we toured the Harvey Dow site the same day we stopped out at the States project on Highway 16. Really night and day in terms of the finish work, you really could see the comparison. But even given the workmanship, our folks took great pride in the work they did. They just weren't really well informed on the use of plans and the importance of that. The AHTD standards that I mentioned which were incorporated into the plans. We're not sure they were consulted. Folks weren't sure. I think one person knew they had a copy at the county. Now, they are available online, but that's not something that crews had access to in the field. And they are voluminous. They're not something you can make a quick reference to. You really have to have some familiarity with them. With respect to the engineering plans, there was even confusion as to who had copies of the plans. We received reports that, oh, sure, this person had it, and then this person told us they didn't have them. The bridge crew was used to doing things the way they had always done them. There had sort of been methods that had been passed down over the years. And there was, to some extent, a mentality that the county can build a bridge however it wants to. Not really sure what the origin of that is, but that is a mentality that we uncovered. Workers would express or ask concerns, are we doing this right? There did seem to be a reluctance to deviate from the way things had always been done because people believed those were adequate methods. Other crews and workers assisted the bridge crew, the tile crew in particular. There seemed to be kind of a breakdown in supervision on the job site with crews working independently. Carl remarked with respect to the two abutments at Harvey Dow that it was like two completely different crews had constructed the walls, and that probably was possible. The north wall looks right per plan. The south wall just looks like a different crew was working on it. But you had this issue with crews kind of working independently of one another and no single person being in charge. At Stonewall, you've got one crew working on one side, one crew working on the other, and somebody's got to cross the river if they're going to talk. And you've got independent supervisors, maybe who have the plans, maybe who don't, working on either side of the bridge. Questions also came up about whether the road department had the proper tools and equipment to build bridges of this magnitude. I mean, you have to remember, we'd gone from 2007 to 2013 since we'd built a bridge of this magnitude, and they encountered like the lack of a bender. And it's not necessarily that we had to own all the equipment, but like not knowing to call a concrete pump truck to make sure that concrete quality was good. That just wasn't really something that factored into the decision making. We received several reports at the Harvey Dow Bridge of witnesses describing days where the job site felt chaotic or not organized. There were too many workers not knowing what they were supposed to be doing. There was a lot of standing around. You would have not only the bridge crew, but you would have the tile crew, and then you might also have like road grader operators and brush hog operators out there with everybody pitching in.
And inmates.
Mm-hmm.
And inmates.
Yes, there was also the use of some inmate labor. The work logs reflect that road department workers will go and pick up folks from the jail, carry them out to the work site, and have them perform work. It's unclear exactly what all that work is. We're told that they do the heavy work, like carry the rebar and do the things like that, not necessarily the important work of tying the steel, but it's hard for us to tell. There are some pictures of inmates out on the Harvey Dow decking when they were tying steel. It's just not clear what they're doing. Many witnesses described feeling rushed on the Harvey Dow Bridge and sensed some type of an artificial deadline. We could not really ever come up with any kind of deadline or why there was this sense of rush, but they described at least one night where they worked really late and had lights out, which made the work challenging even with the light. So the next question we were asked was who was responsible for the deviation? And this varies a little bit because we're not exactly sure who was in charge of the bridge construction. Some people said that the bridge supervisor and the lead man were directing their work. Others said they took direction from the superintendent who was on site almost every day, but the superintendent says the bridge supervisor was in charge. When the tile crew was working, they were talking to their own supervisor about what they were doing. So I sort of think that it's a shared responsibility for the deviations because no one really understood the significance of the deviations. Who knew that the plans were not being followed? Let me be really clear. Nobody was hiding the fact that the plans were not being followed. The people that came to talk to us were very upfront about the areas in which the plans were not followed. Work logs that we obtained, as well as just a visual inspection of the work, will tell you that the work was not being performed to plan. So no one was trying to hide it. It was fairly common knowledge. For instance, if you think back to when I was talking about the footings where they were drilling down into the rock and standing up rebar, there are instances in work logs where it says drill for upright rebar. There are instances where they're talking about bending steel. So you can see some of these things in just the daily work logs that these people are turning in at the end of every week. The superintendent, and then to some extent the assistant superintendent, were often on site, and workers talk about that they received direction, or at least consulted with them on deviation from plans, and there was a common belief that they were aware of the deviations. I think it's a little unclear whether they all understood the extent of the deviations, or the significance, rather, of the deviations. Did anyone notify the county judge's office that the plans were not being followed? Yes, it was a little hard for us to pin down when this happened. I think the judge's office was informed at least by the time we all found out in Thanksgiving of 2014. So these are the kind of the key dates that we were able to piece together in terms of when knowledge started surfacing about the possible problems with the bridge construction. We could really only go back as far as October 2014 because the Braswell lawsuit was sort of interfering with our ability to go back farther. Although we were able to meet with Mr. Braswell with his lawyer present, there was a resistance to talking about his formal complaints because of their bearing on the lawsuit. But the timeline is basically that in early 2014, the now infamous video was taken. Almost immediately after the video is taken, someone contacts the Arkansas Highway Department claiming that the county is cutting corners in bridge construction. This prompts one of the Highway Department's engineers to contact the assistant road superintendent and tell him about this call. Shane Bergen at Channel 5 contacted the superintendent asking about the bridges and possibly contacted others. We weren't able to figure that out. But the point is that in early October, people began raising questions that were at least going to the highest level of the road department. There was an anonymous complaint that worked its way to the Arkansas Department of Labor about a problem with an earthen wall. This is all happening in the first half of October. The state was investigating that, and I spoke with the investigator about that. Didn't really uncover anything significant, but the timing is just important in terms of the questions being asked. So the response to this information surfacing is that the assistant superintendent went to the Stonewall site and talked to the crews about the call from AHTD. He informed the crews that the county could build a bridge however it wanted, in some respect because that's what the state was building, meaning the state doesn't oversee the county's bridge construction. But the assistant superintendent says that he did say, you're supposed to be following the plans. Some changes are made at that point in the construction process. They start using epoxy. They purchase a proper steel handler. The county judge's office did become aware of the call from the highway department. It was just unclear when that was actually communicated to the judge's office because there was a lack of recollection of when things happened. So Thanksgiving 2014 is when the Braswell letter is sent to the court and to the county judge. I've excerpted the part where he outlined his concerns. I would say that virtually all of the claims that Mr. Braswell made in that letter turned out to be accurate. Just again, trying to piece it together. The December 19th is when the Braswell suit was filed. Many of you have probably seen the complaint or heard reference to it. There's more information in the complaint about these defects. So some people went to the complaint to actually figure out some of the issues with the bridges. And I think that we all thought that there was some investigation going on because we were told that there was an investigation. In fact, there wasn't any investigation after the highway department contacted the road department or after George Braswell's letter or his lawsuit. We were advised that October was a very busy time for the judge's office with a difficult budget and an election that was more difficult than normal elections. And then by November, December, there was attribution of the complaints to just being politics. The assistant, or the superintendent and the superintendent and assistant superintendent were assuring folks that the bridges were safe. The difficulty was that there had been no interviews conducted of the crews to determine actually how the construction had been taking place. In the past 2 years, there have been no investigations concerning the road department. Our investigation is the first investigation into any of the allegations concerning the bridges or the work environment at the road department. There was a meeting held on March 18th or 19th after the video was produced in the Braswell lawsuit. This was the meeting where the county met with the engineer, Jim Beatty. Based on the video, it was his recommendation that the stone wall piers be torn down and that the weight limit at Harvey Dowell be lowered to 3 tons. To assure you, the engineer has worked up some rework plans to try to reinforce the existing structures at both sites. So there are repair efforts underway, at least at the planning stages. We were asked to investigate 2 issues concerning the road department work environment. The first was whether the road department work environment creates a culture where it is permissible to deviate from written instructions like engineering plans. I think you all probably know from the presentation already that there is, yes, that is the culture. It goes a little deeper than that. Witnesses were unaware of any written policies or procedures specific to the road department. By that I mean sort of outside of the generally applicable county handbook for employees that must be followed. And this created a lot of uncertainty. They don't know really what the rules are. Engineering plans were multiple, at least 2 witnesses. I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but witnesses told us that engineering plans in many occasions were referred to as guidelines. And again, you get to that attitude of we're the county, we can do what we want. Some people think the county is exempt from regulations. There's a mentality of not asking questions about how the county does things. Some examples that we uncovered about this culture: the smoking and tobacco ordinance, which has been in place for some time but was recently revised by the Quorum Court late last year, is, in some witnesses' views, openly violated at the road department. Dump trucks are overloaded in excess of weight limits. The promotion, job application, interview process is a mystery to people. People don't understand how promotions occur. They don't understand how to apply for them. They don't understand the qualifications for them. That leaves people feeling very excluded and frustrated. I know that those complaints have been raised to the level of the judge's office, and they are aware of those and are looking into them. We heard numerous concerns about safety, despite the fact that there are regular safety meetings held at the road department, and despite the fact that the road department is regarded by the Department of Labor as having one of the top safety programs of area road departments. Safety is surprisingly not very much a priority. Personal protective equipment is worn infrequently, hard hats only occasionally, safety glasses rarely, steel-toed boots rarely, and safety harnesses occasionally. So here you see work on the Harvey Dowell deck with the crane in operation. When we asked workers when they felt like they needed to wear a hard hat, they were told when the crane was operating. But here you see, I think this is a little hard to see in this picture, but I think we can only count 2 of the workers on that deck that are actually wearing a hard hat while the crane is being operated. There was an October complaint to the Arkansas Department of Labor that concerned a vertical earthen wall that had not been benched or sloped due to a nearby gas line at the Stonewall site. Employees were very concerned about working near the wall because they were afraid it would collapse. after the complaint, the gas line was located. A tree was removed. That's the tree I made reference to. When it came down, it fell on some of the rebar that was installed in the concrete. And the wall was sloped, so the situation was cured, but it seemed it only came about because people started asking questions. We heard concerns about improper traffic control and flagging. As best we can tell, there's not a designated safety officer for even the county where people can take concerns, or that a safety officer who oversees safety on site. Safety harnesses fall protection is used incorrectly on occasion. Workers reported, you've got to have something to hook your safety harness to. Workers reported that they would have to actually walk out on the structure and drill or torch a hole into the steel to have somewhere to hook onto. So, of course, until that point, they're not hooked in at all. So this is actually the state project on Highway 16, and you actually see that they are attaching these structures to the steel so that there's something for workers to hook onto and continuously stay attached for fall protection. This is, you can see this is the Harvey Dow deck. It's not complete, and there is one worker that has on a safety harness, and we're not even sure he's tied in.
Point out his shoes.
Oh, yeah, and Russ wants to see, he's wearing Nikes. You can see the swoop. So again, he's not really wearing shoes that are out there proper for construction.
There's an inmate in the background.
Yeah, you can see the striped inmates in the background too. They're very visible because of their uniforms. The final question was about the culture at the road department, whether there is a culture that workers are afraid to raise legitimate concerns through their chain of command. And in fairness, we have to say that the answer is yes and no. There's very much two sides to the road department. There's those folks that like management, are very comfortable with management, and have no problem complaining. But then there's another side where there is a group that certainly fears that complaining will get you into trouble. Example was there was a complaint that was made regarding a policy violation. The complaining employee was called into a meeting with several supervisors and the employee about whom he had complained. And reference was made to snitching in the meeting. Workers feel like they have witnessed retaliation against their fellow workers. A couple people told us if you complain, you get the crap jobs. There are concerns regarding favoritism and out-of-work friendships affecting the workplace. Workers reported feeling bullied and threatened by management, that there's an attitude of my way or the highway. We received comments about employees being broken, like how long it will take the road department to break you. But it was also reported that these are not high wage earners, and these people really rely on their income. And so people are very hesitant to complain with those being their financial circumstances. There were concerns about a lack of an open door policy at the county judge's office, whether complaining at that level would do any good, and whether you would be retaliated against. In fairness, some people have absolutely no problem going to the judge's office. The complaint I mentioned about the snitching meeting did make its way to the judge's office and was addressed. But there's certainly a group of people who do not feel comfortable going to that level. We couldn't really figure out what the origin of that is. I think more than anything, they feel that it just won't do any good. A final comment about the current work environment. These employees are very stressed right now. Some of them who reported no problems previously have talked about how they just really can't handle it right now. The lawsuits and the media attention have been very stressful for them. There's been virtually no communication with those employees about the issues that have come out in recent months. And like I said earlier, they take great pride in their work, even if it wasn't done great. And so when they read on the news that the work they performed was being torn down, there's a lot of resentment about that. And they feel that it's a comment to their work that they haven't really been given a chance to explain their side of things. So finally, let me say that We do think that there's further investigation warranted into the road department work environment that was simply outside the scope of our investigation. At least a couple employees said, well, you really need to talk to all 80 employees out there if you're going to figure out the true work environment. We didn't have time to talk to all 80 employees, and many of the complaints that we were hearing just simply exceeded the scope of the investigation. We couldn't track down every rabbit. We couldn't chase every rabbit. We do feel like in the employees that we talked to, we got an accurate picture of sort of these two sides to the road department. We heard things more than once, more than twice. We were hearing the same things over and over again. But the concerns that we heard that we think warrant further follow-up, again, it's that job posting, promotions, interview process, racial and discriminatory remarks, profanity and abusive language, favoritism and cliques, the work ethic and efficiency, and that means with both time and resources, compliance and safety in general. And that concludes our report.
I want to thank all three of you for your time. I know you've taken it out of your schedule, your busy days, and so I appreciate the in-depth that all of you have done. Thank you very much. Okay, now I'm going to open up the floor for anyone that would like to ask these folks questions. I think you've been really thorough, so, so any of them that wants to ask, they're certainly welcome to. Yes, Ann.
I thank you for your time and effort in doing this. We know that if we're going to build bridges, that we have to have an engineer. So some good has come out of this. That honeycombing is a problem in the pores, and it's very evident in bridges that were built before Judge Edwards even, came in. So the road department basically are building bridges like they've always built bridges. And, but that's not good enough because of the safety issues and the money that we put into bridges. They need to last longer and what they're going to last. I think what we need to do is move on. We need to look at the Harvey Dow Bridge and see what needs to be done to make it safe and to improve its life, the length of its life. And, I thank you. I think we need to move on and have a positive attitude. And I think this will help the road department also. You do good work, but there are certain ways things need to be done, and, we're going to make sure that they're done that way. Thank you.
Lisa?
Thank you, Madam Judge. I have a question, and it stems from a question you asked when you said, I want to know why and who, back last month. I would like to know if department meetings were made, as far as you being the head of the roads department, what kind of meetings took place? Did you have weekly meetings, department meetings with the bridge? If you didn't have weekly meetings, were they bi-monthly or monthly briefings on what was going on at each project during that time? Did you have meetings with them?
I am not going to get into the questions and answers tonight. I'm going to look at this. Well, now, I'm going to go ahead and answer. We did not have weekly meetings. I would meet with the superintendents and the supervisors, and we would have meetings at random.
At random?
Yes.
So I'm just trying to put this together as a puzzle, because it seems to me that nobody knows what's going on. And you should, because you are the head of the department, and I'm just trying to learn and understand the chain of command and why these things were allowed to progress without any checks and balances along the way, when somebody should have said, wait a minute, in my briefing with the roads department superintendent, he brought this to my attention, let's fix it.
That's why you have department heads and superintendents. I have 15 different departments,
Yes,
not
ma'am.
only just road department. I rely on my superintendents. I rely on my people that I hire to do those jobs. But like
Okay.
I say, and that's where I'm going to stand
The
on
second
it.
question that you brought to the quorum court was who was responsible. So who is exactly reports to you from the roads department?
First, we have Sean Schrum and Donnie Coleman, and then they have meetings with their 7 supervisors.
Okay. And so Donnie and Sean then have random meetings with you to keep you abreast of what's going on?
Yes,
So that's those two?
yes.
Okay. I'm trying to digest all of this. Thank you, Madam Judge, for right now.
Yes, Tom?
I want to thank you two, you three, for doing the work you did. I do think it's a very excellent investigation and report. My concern, I think, like JP Lisa, is that it doesn't solve anything at this point except give us information. So as time passes, I will be interested in seeing how the judge deals with this. I don't know what impact the number of people that resigned during your investigation is going to have on the road department and the bridge department. The judge doesn't have any way of knowing that yet. Go ahead.
I think we're already hearing that we're certainly lacking of a bridge crew to complete the work at Stonewall, and we're trying to figure out how to move on. We're without a supervisor, we're without a lead man. I think we maybe have 3 people left.
That will not go back to
Yeah, they're
Stonewall to
refusing to
work.
work on the bridge. But
They will not go back.
Well, this is one of my main concerns, so we're going to have to, or the judge is going to have to make some decisions. You know, are we going to hire a company to build it? You know, and the quorum court's going to have to get involved with the financial aspect of it as time goes by. So we don't have all the answers to this entire question yet. But we do know that we need to change this mentality that exists to end up with the kind of work we have. Now, I can understand what the judge is saying, but even when you've got a number of supervisors and so forth, unfortunately, we're all human, including superintendents and supervisors. And sometimes they do things a little devious and not completely honest and yada, yada, yada. So that's where management is so critical in evaluating all those things and seeing what's actually going on. So we went out and walked across that 62 bridge when Judge Hunt was here. He took us out and showed us that when he was very proud of it. But apparently there were even some problems with it, with the honeycombing and so forth. So didn't have it together then either under his supervision. So, and it is a big job. I don't envy the judge's job of trying to figure it out and straighten it out. But I do feel like she will work at it. But I just want to mainly thank you guys for your work, because I know you put a considerable amount of time into it. Thank you, Madam Judge.
Sue?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if it's all right, I'm just going to address my comments to the presenters.
That's okay.
Okay. First, let me say I don't recall you taking any engineering classes as electives, so I must have missed that on a transcript somewhere. There's a side I never knew about. There's one little criticism. The page numbers are a little small to read from here. I believe it might have been slide 41.
what was the subject? I
Looked
can
like
find
a
it.
41. It was, no, that's not right. 45. You were talking about honeycombing at the Stonewall Bridge. Was that the new piers that had Stonewall honeycombing, or was that?
No, that's the east side wall which was constructed post-October 2014, where they were making an effort to follow the plans a little bit better. So you still have some defects coming through in the work, even though that it was better. The rework that's been done on the new piers appears to be good, because the geotechnical engineer is inspecting that at each level. In fact, they're requiring them to leave open a side of the form so they can come in and truly inspect all the work.
Okay. So the new work doesn't have a problem there.
The new work this year, right? Okay. But we received reports that there were sort of acknowledged challenges with the west abutment and the east abutment that came later. There was sort of this sense of, oh, we did that one by the plan, but yet you look at it and it's not quite perfect. So.
Okay, let me ask you this. The day that we all went out to look at the newly poured piers, at Stonewall, there was a lot of mud there that day, a lot of mud. And I noticed places where there were no silt screens or they were collapsed into the creek. And I asked one of the workers if they put up silt screens. And he said, well, we do it if we can. And I didn't really understand what that meant. And I'm just curious if there is some disregard for following DEQ's best management practices that you looked at.
We couldn't uncover that specifically. There was a lot of reference in the work logs to work on those fences. So there is time put into those fences. The current status of those fences is that they are intact right now. And I think that as a result of some questions that were raised, there are now signs prohibiting equipment from being in the water. But I think there was a point where the DEQ permit did lapse out there, and the assistant superintendent took full responsibility for that. Part of the challenge is that there's many permits, the Corps of Engineers, DEQ, that the county has to obtain to begin this process. And most of those permits, once you get them, they run through the whole course of the project. The DEQ permit that they get expires, and it expired and they were not aware that they had to renew it. So there was a period of time where they were doing some work out there that was not permitted by DEQ.
Okay, I think you're telling me more than I need to know there.
Sorry.
I'm just wanting to know if there is an attitude that we might or we might not follow DEQ's standards, because we just heard from the Beaver Watershed people yesterday, and their number one concern is sedimentation going into the lake that affects our drinking water. And if we have disregard in our construction sites for sediment in the creek, that should be a concern to Beaver Lake. And I just want to know, what is our attitude about DEQ regulations?
I think we didn't, other than talking to the assistant superintendent about the lapse in the DEQ permit, we didn't really get into DEQ issues, because I'm not sure anyone other than the assistant superintendent is that attentive to DEQ issues. That's sort of his job, as he does the weekly DEQ inspections that have to be reported. That's sort of his background. But I will say that sort of in a related issue is there was talk, I made mention to the notion that we're exempt. I think some people somehow think we're exempt from having to follow regulations, and I would possibly put DEQ regulations in that category. Something about dump trucks, the dump truck license plates have an X on them because it means we're exempt, and there's confusion over what that means. Does that mean we're exempt from just having a weigh, but we still have to comply with weight limits, or does that mean we're completely exempt from weight limits? And so there's all kinds of confusion over to what actually the meaning is of those requirements. And so I would say that I don't know that folks really understand the DEQ issues. When I went out to the Osage Creek Bridge, or the box culvert out at near Elm Springs, let me get back to that. You can see that it's this picture. One of the issues with happening out there was a lot of erosion, and they were fixing it by just adding dirt, adding shot rock, and then that, of course, is all washing away. And they went out there and fixed it, but you see this seam right here that when they installed the culvert, they chipped away at the edge. And so if that's not somehow sealed up, you're going to have more erosion as that water comes through. And then I was a little bit surprised, this tree that you see right here is really holding in the bank on one of the sides. And there was significant damage to it with equipment while they were out there that I thought could harm the tree, and it's right there in a bank.
Okay, you mentioned racial slurs and discrimination within the road department. I'm curious if you think there's an adequate representation of female employees in the road department other than in the office.
I believe in the employee list that we saw, the only current female employees are in the office. We did have a list of former employees, and I saw a couple of female names, but they're no longer with the county.
Well, I think at some meeting there was a mention of, I think I asked number of female applicants for equipment jobs, and there was only one that wasn't interviewed. So I think that might need to be an area of concern for the road department, because there's no reason why a woman couldn't run a road grader or be a flagger or multiple other jobs at the road department. Now, one other thing that I've been curious about all along, after we got the George Braswell letter, on December the 19th, I wrote Judge Edwards because there'd sort of been no response to Mr. Braswell, and I wanted to know what the county was doing to follow up on his letter. And the answer I got 10 days later was that Judge Edwards had met with the road department and the engineer. She was advised the bridges were safe, and the investigation at that point was ongoing. What constituted, or what do you have from her investigation at that point?
The only thing we were able to uncover is that the judge's office spoke to the superintendent and the assistant superintendent about the construction and was assured that it was being done per plan. Other than that, employees were not interviewed in any respect. I don't think the bridge supervisor or the lead man was actually consulted until the March meeting, where they were included in the meeting with Jim Beatty, the engineer.
So the ongoing investigation as of December 29th was actually finished.
I don't know if there was an investigation. Maybe it depends on what the definition of investigation was, but employees reported not having been interviewed about anything associated with the bridges.
So you didn't get any kind of report to build on?
No.
Okay. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you, Judge.
Joel?
Thank you, Madam Judge. And I'll just quickly echo the thanks from several people for your investment time in this. So a couple of quick clarification questions and then a follow-up question with you, Madam Judge, if you don't mind.
Sure.
On the people that were unable or unwilling to respond to your investigation, did they give a response? Did they give a reason? Or were you able to characterize or kind of ascertain from what they said as to why they chose not to participate?
Well, one employee was on a leave of absence and was just unavailable to us within our time period, so I don't really put that in the category of not being cooperative. Let me kind of back up a little bit. So on Wednesday, the first day that we began our investigation, we started calling employees to try to schedule interviews. And we started with the bridge crew, naturally. And I was able to speak to two of the crew who were a little reluctant to even talk to me, didn't want to be interviewed, were going to have to get back to me. I explained if there was an issue with them needing to get off work, we would take care of that. Several others we had to leave messages for. There was like one person whose number we had a bad phone number, but I was sensing some reluctance Wednesday afternoon as to whether the bridge crew was going to be willing to talk to us. I reached out to our county attorney and to Lindsay Huffbaker in HR to talk about what exactly had been communicated to the workers down there about the investigation. And I don't know that there had been any communication. They were sort of hearing about it maybe in the news and and not sure what was going on. So on Thursday morning, the county attorney called me and said, we're hearing that these people don't want to talk to you all. We would like to go down and talk to the bridge crew. So the judge and the county attorney went down, and they had asked that I attend, and I invited Russ to go with me. So we went down and had a meeting with the hourly workers on the crew in Donnie Coleman's office and talked to them about the scope of the investigation. We were able to provide them copies of the ordinance. They were just very confused about what was going on. We talked to them about the directive that employees were supposed to cooperate in good faith. I mean, Russ may want to speak to this a little bit, but it was a little hard to pinpoint exactly why they didn't want to talk to us. Part of it was because I think they feel like their work has been disparaged unfairly because no one's talked to them about their work, and they don't know why a pier was torn down that they think they did good work on. But we continued to push. I had Russ call all of them. He had a little bit more contact with some of them, but ultimately only one of those people that we met with that day in Mr. Coleman's office would talk to us. And we never really got an explanation for why they wouldn't.
And I think one quit that day after we
Yeah,
left.
one quit that day. And Mr. Coleman was there when we talked to them, but we assured them that the process was going to be fair. With each witness, I had an introduction that I could probably do it by heart now, where I assured people that no one was a target of the investigation. We were after the truth, that no one would be retaliated against. I gave all of them our cell numbers and Lindsay Huffaker's direct line to report any complaints of retaliation. So those things that we plan to address in the interviews, we actually went over with the bridge crew that day and talked to them and tried to address their concerns. But ultimately, I don't know if I could tell you why they wouldn't talk to us.
Okay, thank you. I know there have been several questions about what actions were taken, kind of at what point or whatever. Do you have some plans in place or some changes that you foresee with the road department, with some of those things that you can share, kind of not looking in the history, but moving forward, what you intend to do?
I want to sit down with the report in front of me. I want to look at everything very carefully. As all of you around this horseshoe know, I can't make snap decisions because I get sued if I do, and I get sued if I don't. So I have to be very cautious and very careful about any decisions I make, and I will weigh each one of these very carefully. Joel, are you through? Yes, ma'am. Oh, Butch.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I just wanted to compliment you on your thoroughness and how informative your investigation and your report on the investigation has been. And I appreciate that you're being very fair to the employees. And I'm sure on this informative part, on the structural design and the changes and the improvements that need to be made, I think will be very helpful to the county judge and the road department. I really appreciate it. I would like to say I was at the epoxy test at the Stonewall Bridge, and it'd been raining. It was kind of muddy. The silt fences were present. They had to take the silt fence down in order to move a piece of equipment over into place to perform the epoxy test. And I know they were there. The workers were very busy scurrying around doing what they needed to do for the test, and they had all us present. Actually, I went down, I had my rubber boots on. I went down and helped them put the silt fence up on the side of the creek where we were doing the test. I do believe they had some permission to move the equipment in the water when they had to.
That's the short-term authorization permit that had lapsed, which is what authorizes them to do that. So
Well-
it was, they were unaware of it, but at that point in time, technically, they were not permitted to cross the creek.
Well, but they were until the permit expired that they didn't know had expired. I've dealt with ADEQ and permits many times. They were able to get the permit renewed. I've got to hand this to them. Might possibly be up to $250,000 piece of equipment that they had to move across in order to do that test. It was a track machine, is a track machine, can't be moved around on pavement or across bridges. I don't believe the county could afford to have one on each side. They did need to move that across there. We're gonna get in these technicalities on permits expiring and try to stick people whenever you can. The ADEQ doesn't even do that. They came out and saw the situation because they had been called, and the permit has been renewed. I just, and I don't really want to get into that. I just wanted to express my appreciation, and I did want to stand up for the road department on being careful about what they do as far as trying to keep the streams cleaner. That short period of time while that permit unknowingly was expired, it didn't make more mud because that permit was expired for a few days than it would have if the permit would have still been good. We might, they might want to stick us for a fine, pay some county tax money out to the state. I just don't see where that's going to help us or any of this situation. But thank you for what you've done.
Joe?
Thank you, Judge.
Uh-huh.
And I appreciate what you're doing. I can see you've done a lot of work, and thank you for it. But I want to talk about bridges. I want to talk to Carl.
Okay, that's what we do.
On these bridges, and I'm in trailer bridges. I've constructed trailers and truck bodies for over 50 years.
Yes, sir.
Sent them all over the world, got on every continent.
Okay.
A little far away, but
So I'm interested in the bridges, and there's two things that I see. The honeycomb could be a problem, depending how great that is for sure, varying degrees. And the rust coming out of the concrete, that's either where the pores have not bonded, or the rebar is too close to the edge, or something along those lines. And all this employees and all this other stuff has all come out of this, but that's all just a necessary part of it. And I'm not holding anything against anybody, but I want what your opinion would be if the perfect bridge that Washington County built was a 10, what would these bridges be like the Harvey Dow, in your estimation, whether it's a 7 or a 9 or a 9.5, or just, I know it's concerned, I'm concerned with the longevity.
Longevity
Yes, sir.
in its present state.
Yes, sir.
The longevity in its present state is very low, and your engineer has addressed this. We had a lengthy meeting with him, who's very competent. I've known him for years and knew of his work. He has a complete design to fix Harvey Dow Bridge to the standards, H20 loading, and he also will give a certification letter when that work is completely done that this bridge is built to be satisfactory for what the county paid him to design. Now, his corrections are going to be costly, and he's addressing them, which I think is a tremendous start to where we go to get where we are. A finished product for our county to have an H20 loading bridge that our school buses, our fire trucks, and other equipment can go across. honeycomb is a common thing that happens in the best pours in the world.
I know.
There is a very explicit procedure for fixing it. It's defined in the specifications. We have all kinds of coatings and things that you do for this. And he will address this honeycombing, and it will be followed before he'll give his certifications. So that's where we are on both bridges.
Thank you. And I know that we will get this handled. There's going to be, from the citizens, there's going to be a lot of expected of Washington County on bridges. And I guess we brought it on ourselves, inadvertently or whatever, and we'll deal with it. This is a great county. This is, in my opinion, the greatest county in the state of Arkansas. So we'll get it done, and it'll be right when we finish, and we'll be better for it. Thank you.
I'm going to recognize Dan Short from the audience right now. Dan?
Thank you, Judge.
Why don't you come, go to the mic, Dan?
I'd like to also say thank you very much for the investigation. I thought it was an outstanding job. I learned a great deal here tonight. And my question, I guess, is primarily for Mr. Gales. I understand that the way the Harvey Dow Bridge was completed, that due to some defects and deviation from the plan, that the lifespan of the bridge may be shortened. My concern, I guess, and what I'd like to hear you talk about with how much danger is there currently for catastrophic failure of that bridge as it stands right now, if you can address that.
We discussed that with Mr. Jim Meady, your project engineer, and with his concerns, he rated this bridge at 3 tons presently as the maximum allowed loading, that he visualized this bridge being safe. This wasn't set by your county people. Your engineer looked at the deficiencies, he became aware of them, and this is where he is today. For us to go across Harvey Dow Bridge, it's a 3-ton limit. If you go across there with a heavy load, it's acceptable right now. And that's his opinion, and I respect it 100%.
Thank you, Carl. Bill?
I'd like to thank y'all. Y'all did a very thorough job. You did a great job, and I'm very, very appreciative for what you do. A couple of big concerns that I have. Number one is safety. In my business, I have to be trained every year. I have to have safety training, and it is it frightens me, I guess because of the business that I'm in, to have what we call a high wall, or we have a wall that we're in fear of that coming down on somebody. I mean, that is a very large safety concern, and also the safety shoes and the hats and all those things. I think that the rules are there to protect us, and so 90% of problem solving is knowing what the problem is. And I think it's been clearly put before us. And I think we have great opportunity to come in and we know what the deficiencies are. Now that we know clearly what they are, we can certainly address those things. And so I'm very appreciative for what you all have done. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Sharon?
Thank you all very much. Just a quick question. When can we expect a copy of the report so that we can all study? That was lots of information to digest here tonight. They're being emailed? Okay, all right, good.
It's 116 pages long,
Okay.
so that's a little bit why I was concerned about, my budget's not that big.
But we can take notes and
Yes.
write notes on the sides and things
Right.
like that. That's what I was really interested in. And also, too, is Mr. Gales or is anybody going to give us some written recommendations? I mean, I think we're into solutions now that we've come to, this investigation. So are we going to get some kind of written recommendations that we can read over and?
Well, we discussed that because I think you get to the point where you have all the facts. Now, what's the
Right.
solution? We didn't feel like we were asked to do that, and we
Okay.
sort of feel like maybe we all come at it with slightly different perspectives and expertise. I can tell you now that I feel like I know enough about the bridge's construction that I don't think we need to pay for an expensive X-ray.
Okay.
Because
I agree.
talking to Jim Beatty about the fixes he's proposing, he's basically, you're going to take the pier and wrap it with
right.
reinforced concrete. And so just assume that the pier is not to plan and wrap it and move on and put the money that you would put toward an expensive X-ray toward the fix. So I think that's one thing that I feel very good about.
That was also his recommendation.
Yeah, and that's what he said,
And you
too.
feel comfortable with that also?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
Jim is a professional engineer.
And good.
I'm a professional engineer.
Okay.
And I respect his professionalism and his being on top of the project. One question I asked Jim, I said, did they call you on the Harvey Dow Bridge during the time, from the time you gave the plans till the end on any questions? And his answer was no. So he wasn't aware until he was called in, and then he became aware of the problems. He was hired by your county judge to provide a set of plans for the fix, and those are present. And I think Miss Marilyn probably has a set of those today. And I have a set, we all have a set that's on the committee.
Okay.
And this is the gentleman that you hired for your expertise. And I feel very confident with him.
I'm going to make, thank you, Sharon. I'm going to make one statement. I hired Mr. Beatty to do the engineer designs. I had the understanding that that bridge was being built by the engineer designs. I found out that there was some deviations that was not with my approval, and I come to find out it was not with Mr. Beatty's approval. I now would like to do, I'm going to present two proposals, but I may come back with the later on. I've got two proposals to the court. We can take the expensive plan, we can hire a full-fledged engineer and have an engineer firm to build the bridge, which will cost you no less than $1.5 million. We can come in now with the improvements, and I don't know for sure how much that will be, but I feel sure with an engineer. Now, we've got RFQs out right now to try to advertise for an engineer to come in to work for the county, along with working with Jim Beatty, also with GTS to have them to help us. And I feel like that we can get those bridges built with that. But like I say, after this report tonight, I've got a lot of soul searching to do. I've got a lot of stuff I've got to look at. But those are my two proposals that I'm looking at right now. But I will certainly keep each one of you informed, because I'm coming to you for some more money. It's just that simple. So, yes, Joel.
To that end, do we know if Harvey Dow Bridge came in over or under budget with these deficiencies?
We asked a little bit about the expense because the cost of the bridges is usually estimated to be around $400,000. That does not include labor costs and also does not include like the equipment costs that would normally be wrapped up into the full cost of construction. I don't know that there were ever a budget for the project. The road department worked within their budget, but that they didn't specifically have a budget for the project. One of the things that Carl explained was we don't really know if it's a cost savings to the county to build it in-house as opposed to bidding it out, because we didn't bid it out. So we don't know what the cost would have been had we hired somebody else to do it. So I would respond to the judge and say, maybe we ought to see how much the bid is before we make the decision, because it may not be $1.5 million. I don't know.
It would have been brand new.
Well, and I don't know if we know that. I mean, I think there were some plans submitted for federal and state funding for Harvey Dow that were in excess of $1 million, but I don't know what that was based on. We could never really pinpoint what that was. But to address J.P. Lloyd's question, I think we have to do a lot of internal review to figure out not just how we want to do it, but whether we have the people and the resources to do it, because the bridge crew is a problem right now. And then you have to sort of look around and see, do we have the people with the skill set to do this? And then is their faith a little shattered right now? We certainly need somebody with some extensive bridge building knowledge to come in and supervise the project. So I don't know that it's going to be a really simple decision outside versus inside, because inside, to me, we not only have to make sure we have the people and the tools in place, I think we're going to have to address some of these cultural issues as well. So
I will research this. I'll make sure of that. Harvey?
Guys, I just want to say that if I ever mess up, I hope you guys are not investigating the situation. You've done a phenomenal job. Carl, I'd like to ask you, do you have any idea what would be your estimate about replacement or repair of the Harvey Dow Bridge to meet the specifications of the engineer?
I didn't.
how much the cost would be?
I didn't put a cost factor on it, and I didn't ask Jim if he had estimated the rework or the additional work. And we did not ask Jim if he had submitted an original engineer's estimate for the project. But it would be my suggestion that we request, that the board request for Jim to give us some engineer's estimates so we could see what realm we're talking about.
Well, with your experience, would you even guesstimate a kind of cost that you would expect a contractor to build a bridge like that for?
Well, I told you not to ask this hard question.
Okay, well, let's let that question go then. What about changing the safety issues about the width of the bridge? Could that be retrofitted to expand the width of the bridge without a great deal of difficulty?
It will be difficult because of the fact that you left it off. It's a cantilever portion of the bridge and sits out there. Normally those parapet walls and curbs are one of the more expensive items of the bridge. The work is more difficult from the standpoint you're going back in. We're going to have to go back in. If Jim put those back onto the bridge and expose some rebar or come up with an additional design in the decking to hold that. And that's just that's one of the things that he can address in his redesign. And I'm being very professional in this position because I'm respecting Jim as a professional. Mm-hmm. And he's and I do not want to jeopardize his position in this.
I got you. Well, guys, I guess rather than another question, I just got a comment, and it may be in form of a question, but number one, I cannot imagine hiring an engineer to do a drawing for a bridge and totally disregarding that drawing. That just blows my mind. And number two, there is absolutely no quality control procedures in place, apparently. Absolutely zero.
There wasn't until, what's the date, Eva, that they started the quality
December, January, February, somewhere in that time frame.
Yeah.
It was somewhere this year.
Harvey Dow was built without any quality control.
Absolute none. Guys, I've had a lot of different kind of jobs, including chicken jobs, and I'm telling you guys, there's all kinds of quality control procedures out there that must be followed to do a quality job. And you know, Judge, as tough as it may be, this all comes home to roost at your house. You're the judge, and the dollar stops here, the buck stops here.
Thank you for reminding me of that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Rick?
Thank you, Judge. Judge, you mentioned that none of this was apparent to you, or you were not aware that any of the construction methods, other than what the engineer said to build the bridge, was being done. And I'll take that at face value. I believe that. So, looking at a question for Mr. Zagan, would a prudent man build this bridge against the design
There are two answers to that question, and they both kind of lead to the same place. One of them is not legal, one of them is common sense. And sometimes, actually, those areas do intersect, believe it or not. But the common sense answer is you pay for plans to have them followed. I mean, that just makes sense. The legal answer is that standards for these things evolve all the time. And so if you were having this done privately, if you were out there bidding a bridge to be built privately, you would be entitled to rely on the engineer's plans, and the engineer in turn would be entitled to rely on the people who are building. But that's a sort of a vicarious liability chain. In other words, yes, no, it would not be prudent to build deviating from the plans. Okay, and there's litigation out there on that particular issue. Now, let me drop the other shoe. And I have to be careful in the way I say this. What liability does the county have for not building the bridges in accordance with the engineer's plan? And at the risk of sounding, I'm just going to have to tell you, the county has tort immunity, as I've told you all before. That does not absolve anyone in the county from or for the safety of not just citizens, anybody who happens to drive across that bridge. So I want to be very clear that when I tell you the legal issue is very different from the moral and policy issue, the county has very limited exposure in this particular area because of tort immunity.
Right. How about the superintendent of the bridge building who did not follow the plans, who did not tell his supervisor, Judge Edwards, that he was changing the plans?
Tort immunity extends to agents, employees, and officers of the county when they're acting in their official capacity. So, personal liability for that is also, in my opinion, limited in terms of legal liability. Again, not confusing that issue with the moral responsibility to build the bridges
per plan,
in the safest possible manner and to standard.
Exactly. So we really don't have a recourse to recoup the lost money of the bridges.
Oh, I didn't know you were going there.
That's where I'm going, because there's been considerable money expended and will be considerable money expended to complete these bridges. One to repair, one to basically build it. And, there is damages in my mind, and I'm not a legal, that's why I ask you.
Yeah.
If I am the supervisor and my crew goes out and does something unbeknownst to me, I know I'm supposed to know with all they do, but if the person who is directing the effort of building this bridge goes off and does it on their own and reports back to me that everything's fine, I'm doing it the way it was built, I feel like something's got to give there.
Okay, so let me answer the question at the beginning of that. And in my opinion, the county does not have a case against its own employees for a whole variety of reasons. Okay. That I'm happy to explain to you in more detail.
I take your word for it. Okay. I just wanted to know where we stand on that, because there's significant money involved, and I don't want to leave that on the table. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jagan.
Dan, do you still want to be recognized?
I'm not through.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Just
Rick.
one
I'm
moment.
sorry.
I want to thank the committee. Thank you so much for your hard effort. I know you spent a lot of time. You developed it very well, presented it very well. My hat's off to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rick. I'm sorry. Dan, did you want to be recognized? Hey, come talk to the mic.
I conferred with Sean a few minutes ago about something he had told me earlier, and about 2 years ago he talked with the highway department, and they told him at that time that the cost per running foot for a bridge was about $6,500 per running foot, and that was 2 years ago. And that was just, I was trying to answer the question. I think it was maybe Harvey that asked that question, what it would cost to bid the job out.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next thing we have is John.
I just want to make some general comments, just so you all know kind of what my position is. I do want to thank the committee first. I think you all did a very good job. It raises a lot of questions and concerns, and I don't think I need to address them here. But they're obviously going to have to be addressed over the next few months. And I really want us to move forward here. It's just my personal opinion. I also wanted to thank the judge, because I think the judge's willingness to allow this to take place in this fashion, I think it helps the citizens of the county, and I think that I just think it's a real honest way of approaching something, and certainly there have been mistakes made, and I think they're pretty apparent. And so I just would like to see us move forward. I did have one question for Steve. Under the, can we take a bridge out to bid and then not? I didn't think we could do that.
You can not accept the bid? Yes, you could not accept the bid.
And
For a
then just
variety of reasons. Well, okay, that's also not as slick an answer or an easy an answer. If you let for bids on a bridge, it would ultimately be the judge and the judge's office that decided what the lowest acceptable qualified bid was. She's under no obligation to take it under the statute, and y'all are under no obligation to appropriate the money for it necessarily. Now, the other side of that is this is not so much a legal aspect as a practical aspect. Typically, y'all would appropriate first, and the judge would then submit the bids after that. And if it came in under the ceiling of your appropriation, it was a bid that the judge and obviously in consultation with folks at the road department said, yeah, that's an acceptable bid and it'll get us what we want at the end, you would have, judge would have the ability to accept that bid and let the contract basically without further input from the court.
Okay. I guess I'm just a little concerned about taking, just because I'm in the contracting business, to go through the whole process of trying to get an estimate together, and then with the knowledge that we might try to do it in-house. But realizing that an engineer can make a bid or an estimate based on his drawings seems really smart to me. And I think the one comment I do want to make is I do think that, and it just begins at the very beginning of a project, the fact that we don't know how much, or we haven't estimated the cost of a bridge versus taking it professionally, it's not negligent, but it just seems like common sense. I do that all the time for my clients, whether I do something in-house for them or have a subcontractor do it. And it's just, so I think we should at least start there, and we have plenty of labor figures that we'll be able to go back and look at and determine this stuff. And if we can't figure that out, then we definitely don't need to start building more bridges. I think that's apparent. But thank you all very much.
Lisa?
Thank you, Madam Judge. I called Lindsay yesterday, I believe, and I spoke with Cassie because Lindsay was out. And I asked her if the roads department had a safety manual. And she said she would talk to Sean and whatever information. I said, not just videos, but do you have a safety manual? And in our conversation, I don't know if I heard correctly, so I'm posing this as a question. Is the county exempt from following OSHA regulations?
No.
Okay. That's right, no.
And I said, well, what happens in the event of an accident? Does OSHA investigate?
Yes.
She said, yes, but you're exempt. So I wasn't sure about that, and maybe that we need some clarification.
We're not exempt.
And is there a safety manual that these guys follow? I mean, I have to submit a safety manual for our employees and to any vendor that I do business with, especially when I'm housed with them. Is there a safety manual? And if not, do we need to write one?
I don't know the answer to that first question.
Okay.
And if the answer to it is no, then the answer to the first question is no. The answer to the second question is yes.
Okay.
I would say write one, but obtain one. There may be OSHA compliant
Right.
manuals out there.
Does Sean have one? Do you? You wrote it? Did you get the memo that I'd called? Okay. Okay. The second question is regarding the inmates. When they're brought out to a job site, and I'm sure Sheriff Helder would love to know that their inmates are being taken care of with all sorts of safety precautions. I mean, are they given the equipment and hats and shoes, same as everybody? Okay. And then my fourth and final question is, I don't know when this was budgeted for these bridges, 2012, 2013, I don't know, but no?
You appropriate that every year when you do your budget.
Okay.
And you appropriated the road
Through
budget.
through the
and
roads
that's
budget.
That's, yes.
Do we know how much was appropriated from the roads budget to each bridge? And do we have actuals on what was spent? Because it sounds like
Sean
there
will
was.
have the report, but there was, you don't go in and break that stuff down. You put it in the road budget.
Okay, but it doesn't say so much for rebarb and so much for
No,
this and
ma'am.
so much for
No,
that?
ma'am.
So we don't know how much it actually cost?
Sean can tell you that.
Sean could tell us
I cannot
that.
tell you that.
So you do have the breakdown on each bridge of what material was allocated for that, and because I mean, it sounds like there was shortcuts being made, and especially on purchasing quality equipment, and I wouldn't think that you would purchase something like that when you had a budget that you could have bought a Cadillac instead of, I won't mention another one, but. Okay. And we will get a report on that? I think all of us would like to see what was spent on the bridge and why these shortcuts were made and why wasn't proper equipment or.
After the bridges were built, each one, I presented to the Quorum Court, didn't I?
I don't think I was here.
I know you weren't here, but I want to know that it was presented to the entire Quorum Court.
Did they realize that you were going to put galvanized steel instead of a concrete wall on there? Because what, there wasn't enough budget?
You know, that wasn't brought up. But,
Okay.
you know, I think that's a whole other issue that I really think Jim Beatty needs to discuss.
I guess where I'm coming from, because I sit on the Budget and Finance Committee, and I'm going to be asked to, in a very tight budget, to go ahead and release some more funds to fix this bridge, which we want to do. We want to do that which is right. And I'm the one that always talks about unity in the spirit of let's get along. But I'm very concerned right now about how this money is being spent and when we don't have it to spend it. So I want to know how much did you budget for each bridge? And then how much was actually spent? Where are the receipts? Why wasn't this bridge built with the concrete wall? Why was it galvanized steel instead? Why were the shortcuts of equipment and quality materials? And I know we're going to get on to all of these things. These are questions that are being raised in my mind because it sounds like we didn't have enough money to build the bridge. And if we didn't, then why did we start to begin with if we didn't consider the cost? So these are questions I know we'll answer later. And I apologize for taking up everybody's time with my concerns for the county. But I thank you, Madam Judge.
Ann?
I just want to remind everybody on the court what our duties are as JPs. Our duties are to appropriate money. Yes, we need to know about deficiencies when we are appropriating money. We need to give the judge the time and the consideration to look at this report and to make recommendations. She is ahead of the road department, and I'm sure that she's going to do some things. It may, I may not even agree with it, but I think that debating all of these issues at this time is counterproductive. We need to give Judge Edwards the opportunity to address and take care of this problem. And then we need to decide if we are going to have the money to appropriate to fix these bridges. She may have the money in her budget now. I don't know. So, I think, sometimes we overstep what our duties are. Our duties are to appropriate. Yes, we need to be informed, but we don't make those decisions. The way we make those decisions is we don't appropriate the money if we don't like the decisions that are being made. So, our duties are to appropriate money, not to run departments. Thank you.
Joel? My question's already been answered. Okay. Eva?
I just wanted to make sort of a final comment because we talked about not giving recommendations, but I just had some final thoughts. I don't think that, this was an organizational failure, and it's something I think back to sort of like a college class where you would study this kind of situation. And I don't know that after I know all the facts and I step back and look at the big picture, if I think there's any one person to blame. I told everybody there was no target of the investigation, that we were after the truth. Words we heard a lot of were I assumed things. And if I look back and step back at the big picture, it looks to me like we started building a bridge in 2012. Well, we started the process in 2012. That we hadn't done a project of that magnitude in several years. And nobody asked the question of, can we? We assumed. We had a bridge supervisor that had been in place for 28 years. We had people who'd worked on the 2007 62 bridge. People assumed. There weren't those questions asked. And there's a phenomenon that I may have it not quite right because it's been since college years since I really studied it, but it's called groupthink, where there's sort of this organizational tendency to achieve a goal without asking questions. Everything's fine. Everybody knows what they're doing. Everybody's following the plans. And it was just an organizational failure. And the desire to sort of fault employees, I'm having a hard time with that. I talked to these employees. They came in terrified to meet with us. I think they left feeling a little bit better about the process. But these people's jobs and livelihood are on the line, and I'm glad that as Russ and I told everybody that we interviewed, we don't have the authority to discipline or terminate anybody, and I don't even want to come close to having to make a decision like that. I do think there needs to be an overhaul at the road department. What that overhaul looks like, I don't want to have to be the one to design that. I just don't, because it's hard. I met with these people who need their jobs and care about the county and thought they were doing good work. But what I saw was this organizational failure of people not asking the right questions at all levels. Not a lot of accountability, not a lot of checking in, and these assumptions. We'd been building bridges for a long time. But in reality, from 2007 to 2013, we didn't build a bridge. We installed box culverts. And we sent a crew out there that we call the bridge crew, and we told them, here are some plans. We didn't ask if they could read them. We didn't ask if they understood the significance of them. And we sent them to do a task, and I think we all need to be mindful now of the fact that we sent them to do a task that maybe we set them up to fail. And that's an organizational failure, and it's something that we'll all study and ponder for a long time. But there's not one person or one issue that's responsible for this. It's an organizational failure, and I hope we are able to put in place a system where we ask those questions. Can we do the things we're being asked to do? Of course we save money. We made the bridge deck 4 feet narrower than it was supposed to be. That's a lot of money cut off the bridge. So, yeah, we saved money, but sometimes you get what you pay for. So I just want everybody to know those are my thoughts. I think we need an overhaul. I don't know what it looks like, and I'm glad that I don't have to make that decision. But I feel very comfortable that there was no intentional wrongdoing in this process. In fact, many of the steps that they undertook took them longer. It didn't even save time. The efforts they went to actually lengthened the process for them and made it harder. So there weren't shortcuts in the sense that somebody was trying to rush something and did poor work that way. So I know that we are going to need to move forward, but I hope we are better for it and that we learn from our mistakes. So that's all I have, Judge. Thank you.
Tom?
I guess I'll end this conversation.
You think so, huh?
Yeah. Excuse me, I hate to disagree with Ann, because I never disagree with her more than 80 or 90% of the time. But we are the legislative body of this county government and co-equal to the executive branch of this county government. And Judge is in charge of the road department. I do not argue with that in any sense. But I am going to be very difficult to get to vote for appropriations for a road department that is practicing the management skills I see over there now. So even in appropriations, you have an impact on how things are done. When you see a bridge full of people like we saw in that picture with no hard hats on, without the appropriate safety equipment and so forth, that's a management issue. Some superintendent, somebody in a management position is supposed to be there seeing that that doesn't happen. These guys that are here in the construction business, so they know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's just really inexcusable. And I want to see that kind of stuff, and I know the judge does too, but I want to see that kind of stuff corrected, because the problem is at the management level there. Like I said, I don't know who quit. Some of them I think were superintendents and so forth, so that may help us in that regard. But that's what I want to see before I'm asked to appropriate large amounts of money for this kind of activity. Thank you, Chair.
Any other comments from the court? I'm going to open up the floor now for public comments. If you guys will excuse yourselves and let the people come forward that wants to make comments. And again, thank y'all.
I'd like to make one recommendation.
Please do. Go right ahead.
I'd like to, and I'm not sure how to do this, but I'd like to recommend that we somehow honor or recognize Carl Gales in his professional services as a citizen of Washington County, not serving on an elected position, some way to honor him, recognize him in a way for his volunteering his time and his expertise to this, because he was invaluable to what we did. Thank you.
I'd like to comment on that.
Well, just go right ahead. Come to the mic, Carl.
My reward will be when these bridges are completed and when that engineer signs off that our children can cross them safely.
Thank you, Carl. Please identify yourself.
My name is Lance Johnson. I'm a Washington County taxpayer, and if I make it 15 more months, I will have been building concrete structures for 50 years. I came here to build the water treatment plant in 1991 in Lowell. We poured 35,000 yards of reinforced concrete, and Alan Fortenberry can attest to how we did, if you want to talk to him.
I saw things that disturbed me, but what disturbs me as a taxpayer, I don't know any way that the county ought to be in the bridge building business unless you have people building bridges all day, every day, and can hire the people that know how to build bridges. We just need to get out of that business.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? I thank you all for your time. Thank you for staying with us. It's been a lengthy meeting. It's been a long night, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Do I have a motion to adjourn? All in favor, say aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.